Welcome to Frightening Fiction, the YouTube channel dedicated to all things horror. If you're a fan of scary stories and spine-tingling thrills, then you've come to the right place. Today's story is called The Aliens Among Us, a cautionary tale. It was a typical Wednesday evening when everything changed for 30-year-old Sarah. She had just finished up a long shift at the hospital and was looking forward to collapsing on her couch and streaming her favorite show. As she walked through the quiet streets of her suburban neighborhood, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She turned around several times, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just as she was about to dismiss it as paranoia, a bright light appeared out of nowhere and enveloped her. When Sarah came to, she found herself in a sterile, white room. In front of her stood a group of beings that looked like they had stepped out of a science fiction movie. They were tall and slender, with elongated heads and almond-shaped eyes. Sarah tried to speak, but her voice was silenced by a force field that encased her body. The aliens communicated telepathically, explaining that they were peaceful explorers from a distant planet. They had been observing humanity for centuries, and had finally decided to make contact. Sarah was terrified, but the aliens assured her that she was in no danger. They simply wanted to learn more about her and her species. They asked her questions about her life, her thoughts, and her emotions. As the days passed, Sarah began to relax and open up to the aliens. She found that they were kind and curious, and seemed genuinely interested in understanding humans. She even began to enjoy her time with them, despite the strange circumstances. But as the weeks turned into months, Sarah started to feel homesick. She missed her family, her friends, and her life on Earth. She begged the aliens to let her go, but they told her that it was not yet time. Sarah began to feel trapped and resentful. She wished that she had never been taken by the aliens, and vowed to escape at the first opportunity. One day, Sarah noticed that one of the aliens seemed to be distracted and careless. She took her chance and broke through the force field, running as fast as she could through the unfamiliar corridors. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew that she had to get away. Sarah finally stumbled upon an exit and burst through it, finding herself back on Earth. She was disoriented and confused, but overjoyed to be home. As she made her way back to her neighborhood, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched again. She turned around and saw a group of people standing on the sidewalk, staring at her with the same almond-shaped eyes as the aliens. Sarah realized with a start that the aliens had not just been studying humanity, they had been infiltrating it. And now, they were among us. Sarah knew that she had to warn the world about the alien threat. She would have to find a way to expose them, before it was too late. She raced home and frantically searched the internet for information about alien encounters. She found dozens of stories from people who claimed to have been abducted, and realized that she was not alone. Sarah knew that she needed to find a way to get the word out to the public. She decided to contact a local news station and tell them her story. At first, the reporters were skeptical. They had heard plenty of tales of alien encounters before, and most of them had turned out to be hoaxes. But as Sarah told them about her experience in detail, they began to take her seriously. The news station decided to run a special report on Sarah's story, and it quickly went viral. People all over the world were talking about the alien threat, and governments were starting to take notice. Sarah became a spokesperson for the cause, appearing on talk shows and giving interviews to anyone who would listen. She traveled the world, spreading the word about the aliens and their plans. As the years passed, Sarah's message began to sink in. People became more aware of their surroundings, and reports of alien encounters dropped dramatically. The world was safer, thanks to Sarah's bravery and determination. And as for Sarah, she continued to fight for the truth, knowing that the aliens were still out there, waiting for their next opportunity to strike. Today's story is called The Midnight Killer, a terrifying tale of stalking and murder. The streets of downtown were eerily quiet as the clock struck midnight. The only sound was the faint hum of distant traffic and the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. Rachel hugged her coat tightly around her, quickening her pace as she made her way home from the library. She had always loved the peace and solitude of the night, but lately, something had been off. There had been a string of murders in the city, all of them happening late at night and all of them brutal. The police were baffled and the killer was still at large. Rachel had tried to tell herself that she was being paranoid, that the killer wouldn't come after her. But as she turned the corner and found herself face to face with a figure in a dark hoodie, she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that washed over her. "Hey," the figure said, his voice rough and menacing. "Give me your wallet." Rachel's heart raced as she fumbled for her purse, her hands shaking as she handed over the wallet. The figure snatched it from her and backed away, a wicked grin on his face. "Thanks," he sneered before turning and disappearing into the darkness. Rachel let out a sigh of relief, her knees feeling weak as she made her way home. She vowed to be more careful in the future, but deep down, she knew that it wouldn't be enough. The midnight killer was still out there, stalking the streets and preying on the innocent. A week passed and the murders continued. The city was in a state of panic and the police were no closer to finding the killer. Rachel was jumpy and on edge, constantly looking over her shoulder and avoiding the streets at night. One particularly dark and stormy evening, Rachel was working late at the library, trying to focus on her studies despite the howling wind and pounding rain. She was the only one left in the building and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. As she gathered her things to leave, she heard a faint noise behind her. She turned, her heart racing, but there was no one there. She must be imagining things, she told herself, but as she made her way to the door, she heard the noise again, louder this time. She spun around, her eyes searching the shadows, but there was still no one there. She was about to write it off as her imagination when she saw a figure emerge from the stacks. It was the midnight killer. Rachel froze, her body trembling as the killer advanced on her, a wicked grin on his face. She knew she had to think fast or she would be the next victim. She scanned the room, looking for something, anything, to defend herself with. Her eyes landed on a heavy textbook on the table. She lunged for it, swinging it at the killer with all her might. It connected with a satisfying thud and the killer stumbled, his hood falling back to reveal a face twisted with rage. Rachel didn't wait to see if he would get back up. She ran for the door, her heart pounding in her chest. She burst out into the storm, the rain and wind whipping around her as she stumbled down the steps. She didn't stop running until she reached the safety of her apartment. She locked the door behind her and collapsed on the couch, her body shaking with fear and adrenaline. She knew she had to go to the police, but she was terrified. The killer was still out there, and he knew what she looked like. But she couldn't just sit and do nothing. She had to take a stand. Rachel summoned all of her courage and made her way to the police station the next morning. She told them everything she knew and showed them the textbook she had used to defend herself. They took her information and promised to do everything they could to catch the killer. As the days went on, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She was jumpy and on edge, constantly looking over her shoulder. She knew the killer was still out there, waiting to strike again. One night, as she was walking home from class, she heard a faint noise behind her. She turned, her heart racing, but there was no one there. She was about to write it off as her imagination when she felt a sharp pain in her back. She stumbled and fell to the ground, the world spinning around her. As she lay there, struggling to stay conscious, she saw the midnight killer standing over her, a satisfied grin on his face. "You shouldn't have gotten involved," he sneered before disappearing into the night. Rachel's vision faded to black as she felt the life drain from her body. The last thing she saw was the face of the killer, haunting her even in death. The midnight killer was never caught and the string of murders continued for years, the killer's identity always remaining a mystery. Rachel's case remained unsolved. Today's story is called The Hitchhiker from Another World. It was a dark and stormy night. The kind of night that makes you want to curl up with a good book and a cup of hot cocoa, safe and sound in your own home. But I was on the road, traveling from one side of the country to the other, and I had been driving for hours. I was starting to feel drowsy, and I knew I needed to find a place to rest for the night. As I drove, I kept my eye out for any sign of a rest stop or a hotel. But as the miles ticked by, I began to fear that I was completely lost. And then, out of nowhere, I saw a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a young woman, and she was waving frantically at me. Without hesitation, I pulled over to the side of the road and opened the passenger door. The woman climbed into the car, thanking me profusely for stopping. She was soaking wet and shivering, and I could see that she was terrified. "What happened?" I asked. "Why are you out here in the middle of nowhere?" The woman hesitated for a moment, as if she was trying to decide whether or not to trust me. But then she spoke, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I was on my way to meet a friend when my car broke down," she said. "I've been trying to flag down a ride for hours, but no one would stop. I was starting to think I was going to have to spend the night out here." I felt a surge of compassion for the woman, and I vowed to do everything I could to help her. I told her that I would take her wherever she needed to go, and I asked if she needed to use my phone to call her friend. The woman shook her head. "No, it's okay," she said. "I'll just wait until we get to where we're going." I nodded and put the car back into gear, wondering where exactly we were going. But the woman didn't seem to want to talk, and I didn't want to push her. So we drove in silence, the only sounds the rain pounding against the windshield and the wipers swishing back and forth. After what felt like an eternity, the woman suddenly spoke up. "Can you pull over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I did as she asked, bringing the car to a stop on the side of the road. The woman opened the door and climbed out, and I watched as she walked away into the darkness. I sat in the car for a few minutes, waiting for her to come back. But she didn't. And when I finally summoned the courage to get out and look for her, she was nowhere to be found. I called out her name, but there was no answer. I searched the surrounding area, but it was pitch black and I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. And then, just as I was starting to panic, I heard a soft voice behind me. "I'm right here," the woman said. I spun around, relieved to see her standing there. But as I looked at her, I realized that something was different. Her eyes were glowing, and her skin was a sickly shade of green. "What are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. The woman smiled, revealing a mouth full of sharp teeth. "I'm an alien," she said. "And I've been waiting for you to pick me up for a very long time." As soon as the words left the woman's mouth, I knew I was in trouble. I had always been a bit of a skeptic when it came to things like aliens and UFOs, but there was no denying the evidence that was right in front of me. I tried to back away, but the woman was too quick for me. She reached out and grabbed my arm, her grip like iron. "Where do you think you're going?" she hissed. I struggled to break free, but it was no use. The woman was far stronger than she looked, and I knew that I was no match for her. "Please," I begged. "Let me go." The woman chuckled, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "I'm afraid I can't do that," she said. "You see, I have a very special mission for you. And I need you to help me complete it." I had no idea what the woman wanted from me, but I knew I had to find a way to escape. I looked around frantically, searching for a way out. And then, in the distance, I saw a pair of headlights approaching. I lunged for the car door, yanking it open and diving inside. The woman tried to grab me, but I was too quick. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly that I could barely get them into the ignition. Finally, the engine roared to life and I floored it, tearing down the road as fast as the car would go. In the rearview mirror, I saw the woman standing on the side of the road, a look of pure hatred on her face. I didn't stop driving until I saw the lights of a rest stop up ahead. I pulled in, my heart racing and my hands shaking. I sat in the car for a few minutes, trying to catch my breath and come to terms with what had just happened. And then, slowly, I began to tell myself that it had all been a hallucination. That the woman I had picked up on the side of the road had been nothing more than a figment of my imagination. But even as I tried to convince myself of this, I knew it was a lie. The woman I had encountered on that dark and stormy night had been real, and she had been an alien. And I knew that I would never be able to forget her, no matter how hard I tried. The end. Today's story is called Escape from the Pyramid of Horror, a struggle for survival. The pyramids of Giza have stood for thousands of years, silent sentinels of a long-forgotten civilization. They are monuments to a power and technology that is beyond our understanding, and as such, they have always been shrouded in mystery and intrigue. But for one group of tourists, their visit to the pyramids would become a terrifying nightmare that they would never forget. It was a warm summer evening when the tour group arrived at the pyramids. They were a diverse group, made up of people from all over the world, united in their fascination with these ancient wonders. As they stepped off the bus and made their way towards the pyramids, they couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and reverence. The tour guide was a knowledgeable man who had spent many years studying the pyramids. He led the group around the base of the Great Pyramid, pointing out various features and explaining the history of the site. The group listened attentively, taking in all the information and trying to imagine what it must have been like to have built such an incredible structure all those thousands of years ago. But as the tour progressed and the sun began to set, something strange began to happen. The sky turned a deep red and the air grew thick with a strange mist. The tour guide grew visibly uneasy and urged the group to return to the bus. But before they could make it back, the ground beneath them began to shake and the pyramids began to glow with an eerie light. Suddenly, the group was surrounded by a group of hooded figures, dressed in long robes and brandishing ancient weapons. They spoke in a language that no one could understand, but their intentions were clear: they were hostile. The tour guide tried to reason with them, but it was no use. They were dragged away, deep into the heart of the pyramids. As they entered the pyramid, the group was confronted with a scene of horror. The walls were lined with hieroglyphics depicting scenes of human sacrifice and blood rituals. They were thrown into a chamber deep within the pyramid and told that they were to be the next sacrifices to the ancient gods. The group was horrified, but they knew that they had to find a way to escape. They searched desperately for a way out, but the chamber was sealed tight. It was only when one of them stumbled upon a hidden passage that they had any hope of escape. They made their way through the dark and winding passage, their hearts pounding with fear. Finally, they emerged into the light of day. But they were not outside the pyramid, they were in an underground chamber, deep beneath the desert sands. The chamber was filled with a strange and powerful energy, and the group knew that they had stumbled upon something incredible. But they had no time to ponder the significance of their discovery, as the hooded figures were closing in. They ran for their lives, but they knew that they would not be able to outrun their pursuers for long. They had to find a way to defeat them. It was then that one of the group remembered the hieroglyphics they had seen in the pyramid. They had depicted a powerful ritual that could be used to defeat the ancient gods. They quickly improvised a ritual, and to their amazement, it worked. The hooded figures were defeated, and the group was able to make their escape. But their ordeal was not over yet. As they emerged from the underground chamber, they found themselves face to face with the tour guide, but he was no longer the man they had known. He had been possessed by the spirit of an ancient pharaoh, and he was determined to claim the group as his sacrifices. The group fought for their lives as the possessed tour guide unleashed all manner of ancient magic upon them. But they were able to use the ritual they had learned to weaken him and finally banish the pharaoh's spirit. Exhausted and shaken, the group stumbled out of the pyramids and back to the safety of their bus. They were met with confusion and disbelief from the other tourists, who had not witnessed the horrors that they had just endured. But the group knew that what they had experienced was all too real. As they made their way back to their hotel, the group couldn't shake the feeling that they had been forever changed by their encounter with the pyramids. They had uncovered secrets that were not meant for human eyes, and they knew that they could never truly escape the memory of what had happened to them. But even though they knew that they would never be the same, they also knew that they would always be drawn back to the pyramids. For they knew that the pyramids held a power that was greater than any of them could ever imagine, and they knew that they could never truly leave it behind. The pyramids of Giza are monuments to a power and technology that is beyond our understanding, and as such, they have always been shrouded in mystery and intrigue. But for one group of tourists, their visit to the pyramids became a terrifying nightmare that they would never forget, as they had to fight for their lives against the ancient gods, who were determined to claim them as sacrifices. The end. Today's story is called Forgotten Souls, a scary and tragic story of the Stonehenge curse. The ancient stones of Stonehenge loomed in the distance, their rough edges casting ominous shadows in the light of the full moon. A group of teenagers, eager for adventure and thrills, had decided to sneak into the site after hours. They had heard the legends of the cursed stones and the ghosts that haunted the area, but they had laughed it off as silly superstitions. As they approached the stones, the air grew colder and the wind picked up, howling through the ancient pillars. The group huddled together for warmth, but the chill seemed to come from within them. They could feel a sense of dread creeping into their minds, as if something was watching them from the shadows. One of the boys suggested they leave, but the others were determined to see the stones up close. They climbed over the fence and made their way to the center of the circle. As they stood before the massive stones, they felt a sense of awe and wonder wash over them. But it was short-lived, as they soon realized they were not alone. They heard whispers and murmurs coming from the shadows, and the sound of ghostly laughter echoed in the air. The group tried to run, but they found themselves trapped within the circle of stones. They were surrounded by a horde of ghostly figures, their eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The ghostly figures began to close in, their cold, dead hands reaching out to grab at the terrified teenagers. They screamed and begged for mercy, but the spirits were relentless. They dragged the screaming teens into the shadows, their screams echoing through the night. The next morning, the police found the fence cut open and the teenagers' car still parked outside. But of the group, there was no sign. Some say their spirits now haunt the stones, adding to the curse of Stonehenge. Visitors to the site have reported feeling a sense of dread and hearing ghostly whispers and screams in the night. The story of the cursed stones of Stonehenge spread quickly, and soon the site was abandoned. But the spirits of the teenagers, and the countless others who have fallen victim to the curse, still linger within the ancient stones. And it is said that those who dare to enter the circle after dark will be claimed by the ghosts, forever trapped within the cursed stones of Stonehenge. The end. Thanks for watching another episode of Frightening Fiction. If you enjoyed the chills and thrills, make sure to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a scary story. Until next time, keep it frightening.